Hi, everyone. It is with great excitement that I introduce you to Colonel Terry Virts, NASA astronaut, author, and speaker, who is live here on our virtual stage during AI Showbiz Summit 4.0. Terry has quite a talk for us, and I think you will agree when you hear it that we are hearing from one of the iconic people not only on our planet, but even in outer space. So Terry, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Molly. This is a great honor. What a cool conference I've been listening in. I haven't listened to the whole thing, but man, you have put on an amazing production, you and Yannicka both. So congrats to that. And let me get started. It's going to take a second. Okay, how are we doing?
Even better.
It's all going well. Okay, great. Well, every good astronaut talk, I think, starts out with a launch story. And it's been a few years since I launched on the space shuttle, but I'll tell you, as a fighter pilot and test pilot, it was the most amazing experience I've ever had. I thought I had done a lot of things. I had flown 40 different kind of airplanes and F-16s and F-15s and everything. There's nothing like launching on a rocket, especially the space shuttle. That 4 million pound spaceship just jumps off the launch pad with 7 million pounds of thrust. So it was an amazing, just awesome thing to do. The nighttime turned into daylight. I will highly encourage everybody, Google STS-130 and just watch the home movies that people posted, and you can hear people cheering and screaming and yelling. It was really awesome. Hopefully in a few weeks we'll be launching humans again from Florida, but it was something that I will never forget. And being an astronaut, it was like the highlight of my career. And this picture right here, I love because it tells the story of launch. Everything during that launch is in this one picture. The first book I wrote, a National Geographic book called View from Above, the whole first chapter is about this picture, that 8.5-minute ride into space. I remember seeing the space shuttle did a roll to heads up maneuver, and that was my first view. It rolled in the direction that I could see out my pilot's window. I saw the whole East Coast, and I didn't expect that. But all of a sudden I was like, oh, I recognize that. I grew up here. And then I had to get back to flying the shuttle. And when the solid rocket boosters popped off, they made I told everybody, hey, stand by for a little bang. And it was this roar of a explosion going off in our ears. And my crewmate said, or a big one. It was a funny moment. The whole time into space was just amazing. I remember looking out and seeing the moon. And that's the moon in this picture. In front of us as we're launching towards it. And it was like, I'm smashed against the back under acceleration, shaking, flying towards the moon. It was just surreal. This long exposure picture, he had the shutter open for a few minutes. You can see all the star trails, and that's actually how much the Earth rotates during a launch, which is kind of a cool thing. But launching into space is pretty awesome. It's highly recommended if you ever get a chance to do it. And the most memorable part of that 8.5 minutes, it was a little bit longer than that. We get into space, it was nighttime, like I said, 4 in the morning. We're going over the North Atlantic in the sunrise. And I remember looking out and seeing my first sunrise. And this is my first daylight view of the Earth. It wasn't this particular picture, but this is basically what I saw. And it was the most amazing thing. I had to focus on flying the space shuttle because I just wanted to stare out at the planet. And seeing that thin blue line, our atmosphere, made me think, I've never seen that shade of blue before. And that was a really unexpected thing. I'd spent my whole life listening to astronauts and talking to my office mates who were astronauts, and I had never heard anybody say that, but it was like a color of blue I'd never seen before. And that was my first view of Earth during the daytime of our atmosphere. But both of my missions were here to the International Space Station. My first shuttle flight was 2 weeks. My second long duration flight with the Russians was 200 days. So I spent a little over 7 months here. I actually finished building it. So STS-130 was the final assembly flight. And then Expedition 42 and 43 was, we ended up spending 200 days after a cargo ship blew up, which I'm doing a movie project about right now. But it was just an awesome thing. You guys, I'm sure most of the people watching this conference have seen it fly over. It's an amazing piece of technology, engineering. It's amazing science that we do there. But I think more important than anything, and I'm going to talk about this later, it's probably the most important foreign affairs project that America has done since World War II, and probably any nation, because with all this conflict down here on the planet, we actually get along in space. And so it's a pretty amazing project. I'm honored to have been a part of it. But one of the best things, again, I'm just a fighter pilot, I'm not a scientist, but one of my favorite things to do is science. And the mission of the space station is science. And we have physics, and we have chemistry, and we have biology. And I did a lot of guinea pig medical experiments on myself, on my own body, engineering, astronomy. There's just any kind of science you can imagine is being done there. This particular glove box, we'd have a rodent research program. I did a lot of research with E. coli and salmonella for a major pharmaceutical company to try and find a vaccine, which is very appropriate in today's world. But with all of this variety, I'm really a generalist. And now that I'm back on Earth, I'm working with different companies to help get them funded. And I like working with young companies and helping them grow strategically, and also just getting them funded, because that's one of the most important things. No bucks, no Buck Rogers. And I've had some funny conversations. Usually they get it. A friend of mine at a biotech company just put me on the board on the spot, and he just got what I could bring. And then others had been like, well, wow, that's an amazing resume. You're an astronaut, but we don't need an astronaut. It's like being an astronaut is unemployable because it's this variety of things that you do, but you're not an expert in any one. And the point I'm making here is that for tech firms, yes, it's important to be an expert in what you do, but I think it's more importance to have a big picture view of the world and tech in general. And you may be a software person, but you need to understand supply chain economics, and there's other things you need to understand. So having that generalist understanding is important, and not everybody gets that. I think a lot of folks don't get that, but you can't be really successful without getting that. For example, Steve Jobs wasn't so impactful. He changed human history because he was a really good circuit designer. He changed human history because he had the big picture and he understood really big views. And that's the way to really be an impact, is to have this broad understanding of things, not just specifics. So one of my favorite things to do, my favorite thing to do was pictures. I'm a photographer at heart. My kids are like, Dad, stop taking pictures. I ended up taking more pictures than anybody ever. This is the cupola, which is everybody's favorite module. I got to install it on 130. It's the 7-windowed module that you can see Earth. It's on the bottom of the station. So in my own mind, Earth, when I close my eyes and I'm in space, Earth is that way, because the cupola is on the bottom of the station. So these are just a few of my favorite home movies, if you will, from space. And this picture it still blows me away when I see it. There's a great scene of this in the IMAX film, A Beautiful Planet, that I helped make. This is Typhoon Maisak. I saw 23 different tropical storms while I was in space, and this one was by far the biggest. It was just incredible. Massive, that the diameter of the eye was so well defined and so big. It was really impressive storm. Beautiful, but also deadly. So it was this really big contradiction of that thing looks cool, but we know it's going to kill people, and it did, unfortunately. But it was an amazing piece of nature for sure. I love this picture. It's this nondescript, I call water, is the title for this picture. This is the story of Earth right here. It's the ocean. So that's the sunlight, sun glint on the Pacific Ocean. That orange is just the sun reflecting off the ocean. But that blue line, you see that blue line again, the atmosphere, is oxygen. And everybody that you've ever known is from below that thin blue line. And the rest of the massive universe, which is bigger than any of us can imagine, is above it. And there's nowhere that we could live. We can't live on Mars without a spacesuit. We can't live on the moon or asteroids. There's nowhere in the solar system where humans can live without, a lot of money and spacesuits. Maybe there are other planets elsewhere in the galaxy. We're never going to get there, or it's going to take a long, long, long time before we get there. So this picture is kind of like, here's plan A and there's no plan B. And I really like the story that this picture tells. This is another one that was amazing. I've never seen this from Earth. This is the Northern Lights. This is the UK and Ireland. We're doing a pass over Northern Europe. And the Northern Lights were always this thin green band. It looked like a ghost to me. Our eyes are designed to work black and white at night and color during the day, but you can actually see the green color at night. The Earth looks like daytime. You can see all the snow down there in Russia and St. Petersburg because of moonlight. This is not sunlight, this is moonlight. Here's Moscow, one of the brightest cities on the planet. But the Northern Lights just never stopped to amaze me. The Southern Lights in the summertime were even more amazing because they were closer to our orbit. But they were really beautiful. And, you know, taking pictures of Earth was great, but looking away from Earth was even more amazing. It was, I love astronomy. You know, I have a telescope. I could never pick out a star. There were so many billions of stars. If you let the lights get dim, let your eyes get used to it, there are just so many stars out there. It's just unbelievable. And that thin blue line at nighttime, it looks thicker. It's brown. It's because of the atomic oxygen and nitrogen, all the chemical properties of what's in our atmosphere. It goes up pretty high. That's like 100 kilometers up there. People can't live up there, but there's a thin atmosphere that goes up pretty high up. And that's moon glint in the ocean, that shininess right there. This view was just spectacular. One of the problems with being an astronaut, I like to say, is that your bucket list gets too long. And mine is so long. There's so many things I want to do. I want to make a TV show where I go and visit all these amazing places that I saw and meet the people and see how they live in all these crazy places. But that blue turquoise color, you can find it in every ocean, but there's nowhere like the Caribbean, the Bahamas, South Florida, especially the Bahamas, but Cuba, the whole area in the Caribbean is just surrounded by this gorgeous blue. And I've never been there, so I still need to go. This picture really applies to the show we're doing, the tech show. This is flying over Indonesia, and as I went over, the sun glint reflected right off of all these rivers flowing out of the Papua New Guinea Indonesian jungle. And so this is the middle of nowhere. The most primitive people on Earth, you know, unreached people that have never had any tech, that, you know, they live in grass huts. My friend went there and showed me pictures of people in skirts and grass huts. And it hit me when I was in space that, you know, there's people down there that have never had technology. What would they think if they knew there was an astronaut in space with this high-tech camera taking a picture of them? It was kind of a profound moment to think about how far our technology has come along in this one image. But speaking of technology, I want to talk about that and how it's gone through human history. So, you know, if the 19th and 20th century were the Industrial Revolution, and the 20th century was the beginning of the computer age, and things have really gotten better. I highly recommend a book by Hans Rosling. It's called Factfulness. It's on Bill Gates' recommended list, and I read it. It really talks about how much progress we've made. Here's an example. I'm sure most people watching this show saw this 2 years ago when SpaceX landed the first stage boosters, 2 of them in formation. It was an amazing example of tech. But it makes me think of how the pace of technology change is accelerating. What's the role of the private sector, and what's the role in government? And there's a few perspectives that I got from space that I want to share first. So I didn't take this picture. This is a geosynchronous composite image of Earth from really tens of thousands of miles above Earth. But I remember on that first mission, STS-130, I was flying over the Mediterranean, and I remember seeing the Middle East, and it was Israel and Lebanon and Jerusalem and Jordan, and they're all right next to each other. And I thought, okay, these guys, there's an Earth, and all this is in this small little area. Why is there all those problems there? But in the moon, that moon that you saw in liftoff was rising over the horizon, and it struck me that you can't see people during the daylight from space, but at nighttime you can see them in the cities. And then I spent a few more days kind of pondering this thought that you can only see people at night, and it hit me. What I was seeing was not population, but I was seeing wealth. And this picture right here demonstrates that very clearly, right? Western Europe, lots of people, lots of wealth, lots of lights. Saudi Arabia, not very many people, lots of light, obviously lots of wealth. Africa, you can see the Nile River in the north, Johannesburg in the south, you know, a little bit of Nigeria in the west, and in between that triangle is 1 billion people with a capital B, and no wealth. And so it kind of struck two questions that this group can probably help solve, but why is that, and what can be done about it? And so that perspective, there's one picture, I think, above all else that really shows the human condition. And that is astronauts, you always hear astronauts don't see borders from space, which is sort of true, but not entirely true. In this particular photo, let's see if the imagery works, really shows that. This is obviously North Korea and South Korea. You can see life in South Korea is pretty good. And you can see life in North Korea between South Korea and China is a disaster. Some people are living in the light, some people live in the dark. And this picture isn't about technology. The problem in North Korea isn't that they don't have enough technology. You know, they haven't learned about electricity, or they don't have enough computers, or if they only had more respirators, that's not the problem. The problem is clearly politics. It's a political system that is focused on protecting the political system, not on helping people. And that's really the foundation of how people live, right? If you live in a country that's a democracy, that's a free market economy, where the power is there to improve the lives of people, your life is probably pretty good. If you live in a place where that's not the case, your life is probably a disaster. And you can actually see that from space. And that, to me, that really impacted me a lot, that you could see politics from space. And there's been a really disturbing trend from my perspective over the last few years that the world has been marching towards authoritarianism. It's been a trend, and it's something that needs to be turned around. And I hope this COVID disaster can be a spark to try and turn things back. I'm not picking on one country or another. It's been a trend, and in a lot of places that's been what's happening. And so the idea that our political life might be the most important factor in determining prosperity, I think raises some key questions. When it comes to tech, how does tech get regulated? Do we trust the government to keep up with the pace of AI development? Can companies be trusted to regulate themselves and self-regulate when it comes to tech? And these are things that nobody understands. Maybe a few people in this conference actually understand this tech, but most humans don't understand what's happening, you know, in your iPhone. And so how do these things happen? And there's this, after 9/11, there was a really disturbing willingness to give up freedom for security. And during COVID, there's kind of a disturbing willingness to give up freedom to be safe. And those are really dangerous when they're in the hands of the wrong power. And so it's something that I think we have to take seriously, like Google's Do No Evil pledge. That's a really important thing. And I'll use this just as a quick government-private sector. I know I'm running out of time, but the government-private sector dichotomy, and I'll use space. And I'm kind of picking on NASA, but that's okay. On the left is something called SLS. It's the big government rocket. It was born back during the Constellation program in 2005, really got going a couple years later, but it's been around for a long time. On the right is a SpaceX Falcon, and the government let the CRS contract in 2008. Well, by 2012, the SpaceX Dragon was delivering cargo to the space station just a few years later. And it's now 2020, and SLS won't fly for the first time for another year or two, and it won't fly with people for a few years after that. And so this is just an example of like kind of how the government moves and how private sector moves. And we need to keep that in mind when it comes to all areas of tech, not just rockets, but so that we avoid this 1984 type of, you know, dystopian future that none of us want. And so I'll just put that into context. Well, we talked about that. So I want to put it in the context of hope. So what is the role of tech in the tech community to keep Spaceship Earth a better place for people to live? Like I said, I mean, the governments ultimately are the power, but the tech community needs to help them along the way and help them move in the right direction of good. Otherwise, we're going to end up with more North Korea type situations, and that's not obviously what we want. So I'll leave you with these few things. I know the time is up. As you are in your organization, remember the big picture. It's very easy to get your head down and just get focused on single things. Your puzzle piece is important, but there's a bigger puzzle that it needs to fit into. And the better you understand the big picture, the more successful you're going to be ultimately.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, Terry. Oh yeah, keep going.
Okay. And then the last thing, and I'll end on this note, is just remember, like, do no evil. The good, using tech for good is an important theme of this conference, and it's an important theme of our work. And there's lots of tech that can do amazing things, and there's lots of tech that can help the surveillance state keep track of everybody and do really bad things. And so we kind of have to self-regulate that ourselves, because putting faith in other institutions to do it, they may or may not be able to do that. So with that, I'm over. Thanks.
Terry, that was absolutely incredible. Thank you so much. Sure. And we have a question that came in. I don't know if you've gotten this question before, but I'll read it to you. They want to know, can people actually live in space?
Well, can they live in space? I would say yes. I actually lived in space for over 7 months ultimately. So you can only live in space with a serious supply chain. The only thing that we made in space was electricity from the sun. Everything else, literally, food, clothes, all the equipment, underwear, everything comes from Earth. So, nowadays we all have Amazon to deliver our stuff. Without that, you can't survive in space for very long at all.
Terry, I cannot thank you enough for doing this. Yannicka says thank you as well.
Sure.
We are so grateful to you. You probably have no idea. Thank you.